Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am James Syphax. I'm going to be your moderator for the session. It is I would say this to be nice, regardless of who I was introducing, but I will say it is truly a pleasure to introduce Dr. Dawn Thomas with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Dawn, if you would just go to the next slide. I think there are a couple of housekeeping things that I have to go over real quick.
Definitely. Let's see, make sure.
And I will say, Dr. Thomas is going to do a bit of a self-introduction later, so that is why it is brief. So a couple of housekeeping notes. Continuing education will only be awarded for those who view the live session. So if you're viewing the recorded session, unfortunately, there are no CEs available. You must attend the entire training to receive your continuing education hours. Post-event evaluation surveys are required to receive continuing education. For social work and mental health counselor credits, you must provide your license number in the post-event evaluation survey. For CHES credits, you must provide your CHES ID in the post-event evaluation survey. You will receive your certificate for continuing education by email within 30 days of this training. So now that the absolute easiest part is done, I will hand it over to Dr. Thomas.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being with me today. I'm really excited about this. I'm sorry, guys, Filter is trying to figure out how to make this box a little bit smaller, and then we'll get started here. All right, so we've got an hour this afternoon, and we're going to use all of that time. So I'm going to introduce myself to you a little bit later, and I want to start off by letting you know this is one of my favorite topics. I hope you're open to talking with me this afternoon. I just want to spend some time with you to talk about this topic, which is really important to me. So I feel like cultural humility is a journey, and so I want us to take this time to be able to do it together. So I want to start off by talking about where we're going today, right? And so this is where we're going. We're going to talk about recognizing the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility. We're going to explore how our personal beliefs, values, and biases influence how we provide service. And then I'm going to give you a few tools and strategies for critical self-reflection to help build capacity for cultural humility. So that's where we're going. I'm going to start off doing something a little bit different. I'm going to read to you a poem that someone shared with me, and I'm going to give you the backstory after we kind of go through this. And this poem is called Where I'm From by George Ella Lyon, and it's quickly become one of my favorite poems. So it says, I am from clothespins, from Clorox and carbon tetrachloride. I'm from the dirt under the back porch, black, glistening, it tasted like beets. I'm from the forsythia bush, the Dutch elm, whose long gone limbs I remember as if they were my own. I'm from fudge and eyeglasses, from Imogene and Alifair. I'm from the know-it-alls and the pass-it-ons, from perk up and pipe down. I'm from he restoreth my soul with a cotton ball lamb and 10 verses I can say myself. I'm from Artemis and Billy's branch, fried corn and strong coffee, from the finger my grandfather lost to the auger, the eye my father shut to keep his sight. Under my bed was a dress box, spilling old pictures, a sift of lost faces, to drift beneath my dreams. I am from those moments, snapped before I budded, leaf fall from the family tree. And so I wanted to share that poem with you. Someone shared it with me as a way to start this conversation, right? And for us to start thinking about how we communicate with each other, how we work with each other, and how we have to share a little bit about ourselves. I don't know how many of you may have been part of the SPIF PFS. We did a professional development forum last year, and there was this great speaker there, and she talked about making connections with people, right? And she, her name is Kristen Davis, Driven to Succeed. And she talked about how she had been working in corporate America. She had a really good career and things like that. And she kind of took a look at her life, and she went to a HBCU, which is a historically Black college, and realized, like, most of the people that she grew up and was around looked like her. And so she always felt like work was one thing and her personal life was personal life. And she didn't kind of cross that line. And she talked about how when she began to be more vulnerable, right, to open up and to begin to have more conversations with people, then her whole world opened up. And that really stuck with me, took me to heart. And so I'm going to introduce myself to you in a different way today. And so I just want you to humor me for a little bit as we go through this exercise, right? So I'm going to try to do my take on where I'm from, George Ella Lyon, as a way to open up and start this afternoon. So I'm from Mona Fay Flowers and Claude Stewart, and they were just a couple of teenagers from Gruss Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. They married young because that's what folks did back then. My parents were young when they had me. They were teenagers. They went to the same high school. And then when the high school administrators found I was coming along, they had to separate. My dad left for Vietnam when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And my mom went on to become a teacher, and she retired from the Cleveland public school system. I am from a family of elders, like lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of elders. And that's what happens when you are young in the family, when your parents are teenagers. The elders just kind of take over, right? So I'm proud to say I know all my grandparents and all of their brothers and sisters. And our family's from Montgomery, Alabama, which is home of the civil rights movement. And my grandmother, who's on the lower left there with me, went to elementary school with Rosa Parks. And they never thought it was a big deal that they actually went to school with like old Rosie is what they called her. I'm also from a family of like fried chicken, Crowder peas, macaroni and cheese, green beans, collard greens, any food you can think of, turkey, ham, dressing, not stuffing, and my grandma's homemade rolls that only my Aunt Linda can make, but I'm really trying to learn. So just to tell you a little bit more about myself, food binds us together with fun and fellowship, but it also dries our tears in times of sorrow. I'm from a family that loves to grow and cook and prepare meals for anyone that happens to stop by. I'm from a definite family of holidays. If there's a holiday, we'll celebrate it, and then we'll especially celebrate it with food. I'm from Christmas breakfast that starts at 8 o'clock every morning with catfish and oysters, grits, and fried chicken, and it ends with lots of jokes and stories. I'm from both biological parents and step parents who came together so I would never have to split my time whenever I go back home to Cleveland. I have a big, fat, blended family. I started out as an only child. We're all the colors of the rainbow. I went from being an only child to being the oldest of 5. For whatever reason, our family is always looking for family. So thank you for allowing me to share my story. And I just want to know what you think. I want to know what you think about possibly starting more presentations like this or doing exercises like this when we're working in communities, and to see, what are some of your thoughts around that? So I don't know if anyone has anything to say. Is it something that you think you could do? I don't see anything in the chat now, and I don't know if anybody has anything, but is this something that you guys think you'd be comfortable with doing?
Yeah, hey Dawn, it's James. A couple comments coming in. A lot of people saying they absolutely love it. Okay. Seems like a wonderful way to open. Quite a few people are thanking you for sharing about yourself. And it makes people more relatable, more reachable. It makes people probably have to make people more comfortable around you. It's important to recognize that we all have a story, and telling our story along with sharing what we're here to share is a super important part of connecting. Lots of great feedback. I can't read them all.
That's okay. Thank you, James.
Lots of feedback.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I just wanted us to begin to think about it because I had to challenge myself, right? I had to challenge myself because I too kind of, came up with this whole work is work and my personal life is my personal life, and never shall the two meet. And honestly, you guys, I don't even know where I got that from. But when I heard Kristen Davis talk about that she was having a bit of a problem connecting with some of her coworkers and some of the folks that worked up under her, and she shared this poem with me, I really took that to heart. So I hope it's something that you can learn from. You'll have the copy of the poem, and actually it's really cool to hear it on YouTube when they play it, and they even have, like, if you want to make yours just like that, and you can substitute in. So as we take this journey today, I want to make sure that you know that I do see this as a journey. And so one of the things, I think I have like the best person helping me do this today. So I love having James here with me. He's fabulous. And so I want to say that as we get ready to pack, you should know this about me. I'm definitely an overpacker. Like, I'm the girl, you know, when I come into the thing, the guys are like, no, it's over 50 pounds. And I'm unpacking stuff like right out on the outside, trying to get stuff out. But I wanted to pack a few things before we got started on the journey. And I hope you're okay with what I packed. And please put in the chat if there are other things that you want to pack. James will make sure we don't go over our 50-pound limit, so we don't have to pay for, you know, extra baggage. But, you know, I wanted to pack some respect today. A lot of patience, not only with your colleagues, but also with yourself, right? The right to pass, being able to take a break. I really want you to share with me today, but I also want you to take care of you and to be safe. So if there's other things we need to pack, put them in the chat. James will let me know. Otherwise, we will go ahead and get started on this journey. Are there any other things we need to pack that maybe I didn't pack? Let me know. Anything we see? All right, we're gonna take off. So, you know, so with any trip, you've always got some stops, right? You got to figure out what direction you're going in and how you're going to get there. And so I know we just got together, we just started the afternoon, and I'm already telling you to stop. And this is our first stop. Did you guys really think I was going to have an actual presentation, Don Thomas, without having the Spiff flower out? Probably never, ever going to happen in my lifetime. But anyway, I wanted to stop really quickly. I promise we won't be here long, just long enough for you to go use the restroom and grab a snack. We won't be in Spiffville very long. But I wanted to stop here because when we talk about issues of cultural humility and cultural competence, right, Spiff puts stuff in the middle that's really important. And so what's important here is Spiff and cultural competence, which means, right, it's going to be at every single phase. So we know that when we're talking about an assessment, right, we're talking about looking at use and related problems. We're looking at resources and gaps and readiness and community problems. And so this is where we want to make sure, like, is our data culturally responsive? You know, did we gain approval for our problem of practice? Did we identify risk and protective factors that are culturally appropriate? And then, you know, when we go on to our capacity phase and we're talking about, you know, human resources and technical resources, you know, and we're talking about community readiness, did we think about checking representation? You know, has our community really been represented? Is it representative of everybody or only the majority? You know, did we think about things when we recruited folks for our coalition? You know, all of those things, you know, the Spiff wants us to think about. And then when we're starting to plan, right, so this is the piece about our logic model and getting that together. We want to see, like, is that culturally inclusive? Did we establish a procedure for, you know, like, well, what exactly are we going to do in terms of evidence-based practice? And looking around and seeing, like, well, who might be missing from the process, right? So those are all things we know. Like I said, this is a quick review, but I want us to keep this in mind, in the back of our mind as we move forward. And then implementation, because isn't this everybody's favorite phase? You know, quite honestly, we always want to run right into the implementation phase. We want to, you know, oftentimes we want to start it without even collecting our data, but we know we have to do that. So we want to make sure, I love this part because we want to talk about, you know, making sure that when you're implementing something, that you have some system of communication where you're getting feedback, right? And along the way so that folks are like, oh, I'm not really sure about this. I can kind of give you that feedback. So we want to take a look at that. And then finally, you know, we want to take a look at our evaluation. So, you know, where are our areas for improvement? You know, did our data collection tools, did they really reflect the community culture? You know, and how are we tracking our outcomes and things like that? So I told you just a quick stop in Smithville. We're going to move on. And now we're moving on to cultural competence. And so one of the things I want to talk about today is there's been a lot of conversation about cultural competence, cultural humility. It's not really a one or the other, right? They complement each other. And so that's what I want us to talk about today. And I'm giving you SAMHSA's definition for cultural competence because SAMHSA is who, quite honestly, the majority of us get our funding from, right? We get funding that flows from the federal government down to our single state authority, which would be Ohio MAS, flows out to our ADAM boards. And welcome to all of our folks that are not from Ohio and that are from Kentucky and North Carolina and everywhere. That's pretty much how our Ohio system works. But SAMHSA and a lot of our federal funders are major people. So I wanted us to start with this definition. And so what we realize in this definition is it talks about cultural competence being a process, right? It's always a process of communicating with audiences from diverse backgrounds and also being able to communicate right across backgrounds, right? And so it's a dynamic process and it requires a lot of knowledge, skill development at all service levels. So not just in providing service, but also in policy making, right? So wanting to remember that. Another thing is, as we take this journey together, I want you to know that Ohio has its own definition of cultural competence. If you didn't know that, now you know, right? So we always like to be like first and on cutting edge in Ohio. So of course we'd have our own definition of cultural competence. And if you're going, well, where did this come from? I never heard of it. So there's an organization called the Multi-Ethnic Advocates for Cultural Competence. It's known as MAC. And it came together some years ago, and they brought together a lot of other agencies, like at the time it was Ohio Department of Alcohol and Drug Addiction Services, Ohio Department of Health, Ohio Department of Mental Health, to talk about what is a definition we can agree on. And so Ohio said, you know what? Well, we believe it's a process too, but we believe it's a continuous process, right? And it's going to build our knowledge and our awareness and skills and capacity. And the whole purpose is that we really want to understand and we want to respect the customs, the languages, and the abilities of everyone and the traditions of everyone in the state of Ohio. And again, the whole purpose is to promote effective programs and services, right? So just a quick stopping point is to think about, so when we stopped at Smithville, right? And we talked about assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, evaluation. All of that has to do with how we're providing services, right? What we're doing to the community or with the community rather, how we're working to have effective programs and policies. And then our Ohio definition also kind of circles back to that, right? The developing policies to promote effective programs and services. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So I'm going to ask for some feedback. So get ready, turn your chat on. So my next question to you now is, what is culture? I mean, in all honesty, what's culture? What do you think culture is? Take some time, put it into the chat. Let me know what you think. Tell me what you believe culture to be. And let me know if you're seeing anything, James.
Yeah, and just a note for the participants, I think it actually says for you, it's the questions box, but we can see everything you type in there. So if Dr. Thomas ever asks for feedback and you have something to add, it's the questions.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
So a couple comments.
Can you please repeat the question? Tell me what you think culture is. Just what is it?
Sure. The fishbowl we grow up in.
Yeah, I love it.
Values, traditions, language, the beliefs shared by a group of people, traditions and beliefs passed down in families, seeing a lot of beliefs and values, a set of common ideals and experiences, what we connect to. Culture is the sum of our lives, ethnicity, gender, and traditions.
Love it. I knew you would blow this away, right? So some of you have had lots of experience around, cultural competence training. And so I just like us to remember that culture is all of these things, right? Culture is all of those things. Culture is all those things that I talked about where I'm from when we started in the beginning, just so you can kind of understand that. And so you guys are absolutely right. everything that you have is basically up here. I think I even heard somebody say, which I always like to remind people, is that culture is generally like transferred down, right? From generation to generation. And it's all about our personal beliefs and values. And so what we want to think about our culture is we want to think about how our culture impacts how we provide services, right? And so I have to think about the things that I shared with you guys and how that impacts the services that I provide. So we're going to talk a little bit more about cultural competence here. And so there's about 5 elements of cultural competence, right? And so the first one is kind of just, valuing diversity, understanding that everybody has differences. And the second one is self-awareness. And that's kind of where we're going to live this afternoon. We're going to kind of, I hope together, we're going to stay in that self-awareness piece, right? And then the third piece is dynamics of differences, being conscious of differences when you're interacting with people, and being conscious of the fact that there's different dynamics inherent, when cultures interact, right? And then knowledge of community culture. So this is something I think prevention folks I think we just do a good job of, right? We generally know our community. Nobody knows your community better than you do, right? And so making sure that you have a really good knowledge of community culture. And then adaptation of skills. So these are some of the elements of cultural competence. Again, we're going to kind of stay in the self-awareness piece today. That's where we're going to do some of our work. So wanted to have that background about cultural competence, and now we're going to talk about cultural humility. And so this definition comes from Dr. Melanie Tervalan and Dr. Anwar Murray Garcia. They're both medical doctors, and you'll see that when we read the definition, right? So it talks about a lifelong process. So again, right, SAMHSA talked about it being a process, and in Ohio, we said it was also a process, right? It was continuous process. And the difference is it says it's a lifelong process, but it's a commitment to self-evaluation and critique. So a little bit different, right? To redressing the power imbalances in the caretaker-patient dynamic, so that's the piece because they're medical doctors, and to develop mutually beneficial and non-paternalistic relationships and partnerships with communities on behalf of individuals in underrepresented populations. So that's a little bit different, right? So you can kind of see how it's like, yeah, it's the lifelong process piece, but it's also the commitment to self-evaluation and critique. And that's a little bit different, right, than cultural competence. So I believe that James has shared with you. We're going to take a look at a video right now. I think it's about 3 minutes. And I want you to click on to that video and just tell me what you think from there. So we're gonna, I think the video is listed in the chat, if I'm not mistaken. And hopefully you will be able to access that. All right. Are we good, James? I think hopefully people are.
Yep, there's a clickable link in the chat box, and everybody should be good to go.
James, you think the video is about over? Are we good to go?
Yeah, we're getting feedback from folks that they've wrapped up. A lot of people providing some very positive feedback.
Great, great. Okay, perfect. So I'd just like to know what you all think. Again, James said put your information in the questions. What are some of your thoughts around the video? What are some things you thought about or some key points or takeaways for yourself? Thoughts on the video?
Yeah, we're getting a couple starting to come in. Institutional accountability is key.
Okay.
I wish people would talk more and judge less. Appreciated that it discussed elements at the personal level and institutional level. I'll chime in for me.
Okay.
I like that they specified not just clinician, you know, she said clinician and patient, but she expressed that in a much broader sense, which I think as preventionists, sometimes when we hear clinician and patient, we kind of tune out. So I love the way they presented that. Getting a lot more positive feedback. The humility piece is about all being equal. I loved the people who said love, to me, just loving and being open to others and where they came from and offering mutual respect for understanding would be so helpful in our current world. Critical self-reflection is so important. We're seeing a lot of the same things said in different ways.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to ask you again to share a little bit. And I don't know, James, if we might be able to, we can either continue to chat or we might be able to unmute folks. So my question to you is, as we're working on this afternoon, we're going to have lots of times where we have this kind of interaction through the chat. And if I can hear your voices, I'd like to, if we can do that. So my question to you is, how do you think the notion of cultural humility connects with your work? Again, I understand that Dr. Melanie Tervalon and Dr. Murray Garcia, they're doctors, but just like James talked about, you know, putting it into that broader context, not just a clinician, not just about patient relationships. So how do you think the notion of cultural humility connects with your work? Is it possible we might be able to unmute some folks? I don't know if that's going to
so there should be an option to raise your hand. So
okay.
if you have something you'd like to add, just raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Evie has raised her hand. Evie, go ahead.
Hey, Don. So in answer of your question, since I primarily work as an adult ally, I'm very aware of the fact that my ability to connect with young people outside of youth council and even within youth council is impacted by just my identity, both as a white female and as an adult. And so I need to be able to work effectively with diverse young people so that they can connect with other youth outside of themselves who I will necessarily have limitations reaching.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being aware of those things, right? So that's what we want. I appreciate your honesty and the courage to be able to sort of open up and be vulnerable. And that's what we want to talk about today. I mean, I hope that's what people want to have a conversation about so that we can work on this notion of cultural humility. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything to share? Looks like.
Brenda, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, yes. So I was doing some work over the summer as a case investigator for COVID-19, and this was a concept. I actually we watched that video in our training, on our onboarding training, because it was so incredibly important, because we are talking with diverse groups. Northern Virginia, where I live, is incredibly diverse, which I think is one of the strengths of the area. But I knew that I was going to be talking with all different types of people, and so I had to come to that conversation with an open mind and an open heart, and not make assumptions or judgments about how they might have gotten exposed, or how they might have gotten how they might have contracted COVID, just being very open and non-judgmental. And so I found that training and this training to be extremely helpful as a reinforcement that it is a lifelong learning. And in order for you to make it work, you do have to commit to it. And so I really do love those two pieces, because they make it so that you are accountable to continuing that work.
Right. And, and so thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I just feel like I wish we were together. I mean, I'm going to tell you guys, like, I was so excited when I thought I was going to be able to come to Cincinnati. We're going to work in work groups and all that, but that's okay. This is where we are, and we're still going to do it here in a different way. But thank you for sharing that, because, man, I'd love to talk about that more. But just the whole, I was very excited when we were like, we've got all these trackers and these workers in communities, but I was also really nervous, like, oh my goodness, you talk about having so many cultural challenges, it's so important for us to get the information, but it's even more important for us to be so respectful as we're trying to get it. So it's like this balancing thing. So thank you, Brenda, for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Anybody else want to share one more, maybe? All right.
Yep, no, we do have, I'm sorry, we had one more. Kate?
Okay. Thanks, Kate.
Oh, I'm sorry, she put her hand down. We might have scared her off.
No problem.
Oh, there we go. She's back. Kate?
I'm sorry, I've not used this platform before.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm a student employee for the Voinovich School for the Partnership for Community-Based Prevention team. So we do a lot of work with these different initiatives around the state. It's important to keep cultural humility in mind, since we're located in one small area, but we're working with communities statewide.
And Kate, where did you say you were working at when you first started? In the beginning, I heard a little bit of it.
Yeah, I'm with Ohio University's Voinovich School for Leadership and Public Affairs. I'm on the Partnership for Community-Based Prevention team.
Ah, yes, okay, great. Thank you for responding to that. So yes, so I just wanted us to open up the conversation so that we understand, it definitely impacts, right, all of the work that we do. And so one of the biggest things that we know from the video is the focus on lifelong learning and critical self-reflection, recognizing and challenging our power imbalances, and that institutional accountability. And one of you guys made a point of saying that in the chat. They love that piece about institutional accountability. And I know another person even said that whole piece about lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. So this is kind of where we're going to live today, right? We're going to live in sort of these areas. And again, we could do an entire day on this. Our time is limited, so we're going to use it as wisely as we can. And so we're going to go right into our lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. So one of the things I like about this piece with cultural humility, right, is when you make this sort of commitment to lifelong learning and critical self-reflection, it doesn't necessarily, I don't want you to think it lets you off the hook, but when you come from this humble place of like, I don't know, I just don't know, but you've made the commitment to that, it really helps to, I think, kind of sort of ease things a little bit, right? Because when we stopped in Smithville, right, and I was like assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, evaluation, I'm like, and you have to be culturally competent in all these ways, and you can just feel the tension like, ah. So when we're talking about cultural humility, and we're talking about coming from a place of knowing that we don't know everything, right? Being able to accept our own limitations, but also being encouraged to be curious. And I like to say, like, the kind of curiosity you had, like, you remember when we were like in elementary school, we want to know why, well, why, well, why? So it's not just about sort of letting you off the hook or be like, well, I just don't know. It's too many things to know. It's too many cultures to work with, but it's being encouraged to be curious. And so that's that piece that we have to work on ourselves, right? That commitment to lifelong learning. So, you know, being open to those around us who want to learn about us is important. Being accountable for constant learning and curiosity to understand those around us. And then that, again, freeing us from feeling like we have to be the experts on everything. And I want to talk a little bit about this today, because I wouldn't be who I am. Like, I feel like I know that a lot of times, many of you have probably been to many cultural competency workshops, and you know, this kind of becomes routine. But one of the things you know, if you don't know, you'll know today about me is that, you know, I like to be authentic, and we have to be intentional and thoughtful about everything we do. And so it would not be fair for us to have a workshop on cultural humility today in this bubble of this is our lane, and we're going to ignore everything that's going on around our world, right? So you're going to hear me say some things that are going on around our world because it's the world we live in. If we're going to work on being culturally humble, we have to not do it in a silo. So one of the things I want to go back to that first point. So it says being open to those around us who want to learn about us, right? And so sometimes, you know, people are going to ask you questions that you may feel are offensive or are, you know, are not the best question to ask, you know, and so this is a part of our lifelong learning, our commitment to like, okay, so let's say, I mean, I'm just going to throw, let's say James asked me this question and I'm like, that was a stupid question. I'm thinking in my mind, I didn't say it to James, like, I can't believe he asked me that, You know, I've got to figure out if I'm making this commitment, you know, you know, what's my responsibility too to help James? Because maybe James just wants to be an ally for me, right? And that's okay. But what I think we have to understand is that we're in a critical time in our nation. It's critical. We are seeing racist behavior and behavior that is just despicable play out in all fashions with the murdering and the lives of people. And we're seeing it over and over and over and over again, right? And so people are fed up. And so what I want to just say about that first point where it says being open to those who around us, who want to learn about us, that when you have to do that, you also have to have a sense of empathy and understand that some folks, and I'm going to be specific right now because I identify as an African-American female, but some folks are tired, right? And so there are things being played out in the streets of our nation that are just like ripping the Band-Aid off of years of hurt and trauma and anxiety. And so just understand that when you maybe ask somebody about something, right? So maybe James asked me about something and I don't want to answer it, but I have a responsibility at some point to say, you know what, what's my part in helping him learn? And so the thing is, it doesn't, you know, no one's perfect. So I don't have to answer the James. I don't have to do that, you know, because maybe I'm not ready. But what I want to say for the other person that's asking is also be aware, right? Be aware of the world we live in, the temperature and how it feels, And sometimes the timing's not right because none of us are perfect, right? So I just want to say that being accountable for constant learning, we talked about that. And then again, it just sort of frees us from feeling like I got to be the expert on every single thing. So one of the pieces that we talked about as well is with the constant lifelong learning is this critical self-reflection, right? So I wanted to bring in this piece about John Dewey, and honestly, I didn't learn about John Dewey until I went back for, I think, my PhD. And so John Dewey is like, he's like the father of reflective thought, right? And so when we think about the progressive education movement, people go straight to John Dewey because he talks a lot about how we think. This is back in 1910 and 1933. He was challenging educators to think about, their thoughts. And so he talks about active, persistent, and careful consideration of any belief that we have, of any belief or supposed form in the light of the grounds that support it. And so he really sort of challenges us, right, to think about it. So again, he kind of was like the father, the Bible of progressive educators. And, he had sort of this forethought on the importance of reflective thought. So I really love this. So John Dewey says, we don't learn from experience, but we learn from reflecting on our experience, right? And I think it's something important for us to think about. So this is why we want to talk a little bit today about, reflecting on your experiences and the importance of critical self-reflection. As professionals, we should always be engaged in critical self-reflection, right? So one of the things I call this is, on action, in action, and for action. So, why should we use critical self-reflection? So I like to think of it like this. I say that in our lifetime, every single day as a leader, I have all these moments. I call them leadership moments all day long. You add them up for the day, to the week, and to the month, to the year. We've got all these different opportunities in our lives to make decisions about stuff. And so I call it the power of what if. All day long we're making decisions, right? And it's like sometimes you go, crap, what if I probably shouldn't have done that? What if I had done this thing? And so what's more important is for us to reflect. So when we reflect on action, that's us going, okay, that happened in the past, and really taking the time to process that. And then when we reflect in action, that's, as it's happening, something's going on and you're like, oh my God, this is not the right response, but I'm just responding. And I feel like sometimes as preventionists, there's a lot on our plate, right? So people expect us to do lots of things, and we're good at juggling balls and things like that. And sometimes reflecting in action isn't very helpful or doesn't lead us to the best decision. And then also reflecting for action. So then taking some time to go, I had this conversation with Evie earlier today, and she said this thing, and maybe I didn't respond to her in the best way, and then thinking about how I can do it in the future, right? So we've got tons of moments throughout our careers to make these decisions, and we don't always get it right? And it's okay that we don't always get it right. The important thing here when we're talking about cultural humility is understanding the importance of critical self-reflection, on action, in the action, or for the action. And taking some time as professionals, because when we went to Spiffville, right, we got all those different phases. Oh, we got to do all these things. We got to keep the community involved. We got to make sure who's not included. This cultural humility piece, this is about us. This is about us really taking some time to develop our self-awareness and thinking about how decisions, and then not just the experience, but reflecting on it. So that's that piece on critical self-reflection. So the other piece of this is recognizing and challenging power imbalances, right? And so a lot of times you guys might think, well, I'm from the community. I'm in the community coalition and they're in the coalition too. So I don't have power, but you have to think about all the different types of relationships we have and how in certain situations we do have power, right? And so it's really funny. I'll tell you the story. When I first started with the state, working for the Ohio Department of Alcohol and Drug Addiction Services, we had something called Regional prevention coordinators and regional treatment coordinators. And our director at the time said, I want you to get out. I want you out of here. I want you in the community at least 2 days a week so that you can really understand communities. And so I was so excited. So I had the 10 counties in northeastern part of the state. And I was like, yes, I get to, go back. And so I would call them like, hi, this is Dawn. I was wondering when I could come out. And so I'm sure they were on the phone like, from Dad is from the state. And I'm all like, yeah, and they would be like, well, why do you want to come out here? What are you coming out here for? So like young in my career, didn't even recognize the power imbalance. I'm just like, yes, I'm getting out. I'm getting to figure out what's going on. And so I can't remember who the person was. It might have been John Lissy or John Ellis, one of the Johns. They said like, oh, you're a statey, so I didn't even recognize that in terms of like funder and community, because I was too naive. So it's important for us just to recognize those power imbalances, acknowledge those differences and take responsibility, and then make attempts to neutralize them. And sometimes we can do that just at the start of a meeting. It's like, hey, my name's Dawn Thomas. I'm here today on behalf of Ohio Moms. But what I want you to know is I'm really here to have a conversation. So yes, I am a part of a funding system, but trying to neutralize that conversation, right? And so those are some of the things that we want to do. And we can't have a conversation about power and power imbalances without having a conversation about privilege. We just can't, right? And so we understand that privileges are rights and advantages that some people have and some people don't. The main thing to remember is that it's a special thing, an advantage or a right or something held as a prerogative, and it can be based on race or class or social or economic. And so we want to understand that all of us at some point in our leadership roles have systems of privilege, right, and power. And so being aware of that. And so I think it was Kate, if it wasn't Kate, it was Brenda that talked about when she was going out into the community as a worker for COVID, she maybe never even thought like, this is a level of privilege or an uneven power thing. Cause it's like, I'm coming out, I'm coming to, collect some data. So all of those pieces that come with it. And it's just us being aware of that, right? So I think it's important for us to recognize it, and be aware of it. And so I want you to get ready for the chat or either to unmute yourself. And what I want you to do is let's talk about, so what are some of the things you've heard other people say about privilege? Doesn't have to be you, but what are some things you've heard other people say about privilege? Let's just get it out here. Because, right, these are kind of like uncomfortable conversations to have, but I'm a fan of uncomfortable conversations. Growth comes from uncomfortable conversations. Creativity and initiative, come from uncomfortable conversations. And if we're going to effectively work with each other, right, we have to have them so that we can get through. So what are some of the things you've heard other people say about privilege? And if you raise your hand, we can unmute you, or you can put it right in the chat.
Yeah, we will start with Nonya. She's got her.
Hi, Nonya.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Dawn. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So I've had some really, really interesting conversations with my husband just very recently about privilege. And he's a welder that works in a shop that's very not culturally appropriate most of the time, and so really having some interesting conversations where when we first started talking, came from this idea that, I've worked really hard for everything I've ever had. I've never been privileged in my life. And, these conversations like that. And so we really started talking about, that's not what this means, right? It's not that kind of privilege. It's about this idea that, what happens when you get pulled over by the police? And he's like, well, I get really cocky because they blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, for anybody of color, when they get pulled over, they worry about dying. So these are the kind of, so we started having those kinds of conversations, and it really took months but he started to shift the way he looked at privilege and what that word really meant. And so that's been really, in the beginning, it was really disheartening, right? To be like, wow, this is how you look at this? Really? Is that what you see? And then just being really appreciative of the fact that while things are definitely a challenge now, and I wouldn't want to say that anything that's happening out there is a good thing or that, you know, this is okay, but look at the fantastic conversations we get to have and what we get to see change and happen. And no, this isn't a huge step, but that's a really interesting thing to have been a part of and to watch happen. And I just think that having that conversation about privilege, when we can relate it, in my experience, when we can relate it to that idea of, we don't worry about getting deported. We don't worry about getting killed. We don't worry about our kids not coming home at night. You know, really kind of relating it to those situations, it seems to have that bigger impact.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. I knew this discussion would be rich because we all have some experiences and ideas and questions. Thank you so much. Is there anybody else that would like to share about that?
We've got a couple comments I'll share.
Okay.
Latif, I saw you had your hand up. I'd invite you to put that back up if you want to chime in. But a couple comments in the chat box is that, you know, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. You know, some people saying that it doesn't exist. And of course, these are all things that they've heard from people, not that they're saying. You know, I grew up poor. How am I privileged? You know, white men saying that they're offended by the term white privilege.
Right.
Just a lot of very similar comments. JP has his hand up. I will
Great.
throw to him for some comment. JP, I think you're self-muted.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you, JP.
Hey, you know, I've had some very interesting conversations with my own family actually when it comes to privilege. And for those people who don't know, I am Black, but my parents are Haitian. And it's been interesting because, you know, when I talked to my mom, for a long time, she could not really understand the race issues in the US based off her experiences in Haiti, given that Haiti is a predominantly Black country. So that was always something that boggled her mind. And, you know, I've had conversations with her about, you know, when you look at African American history versus Haitian history, you know, Haitians have had the opportunity to build their history off of a successful revolution. So that's kind of all. If you go date back to the Haitian Revolution, that's kind of where Haiti built its identity off of, and because of that, they have a very strong pride and identity. And when you look at African Americans, I mean, during the slave trade, I mean, you took a bunch of people from Africa, erased their culture, erased their original language. Haitians have, you know, Haitian Creole, which is a language that they created during the revolution, so they have that. So there's that cultural dynamic that, you know, she didn't really understand as well. And also for me, like, I grew up in a predominantly white community, so when it came to access and wealth compared to, you know, other Black folks who lived in more impoverished communities, we had that privilege. You know, I went to a very good public school and things like that. So that was another conversation I had to have to say, you know, it's not only just race, you know, class is also a thing that we have to consider, and we need to acknowledge our privilege in that we live in a very good community. We don't really worry about, you know, gun violence or anything like that. So you have to take that into conversations as well. And the one last thing that's interesting is even comparing her to my dad, there's a weird privilege dynamic there as well, because my dad grew up extremely poor in the countryside of Haiti, and she grew up in the city, the capital, from like a very wealthy, very heavily involved in government type of family. So even when she looks at Haiti as a country and her upbringing versus my dad's upbringing, she has a completely different view of Haiti than my dad does, just based off that privilege, that class difference as well. So I've just had really interesting conversations with her about it. So there's a lot.
Thank you so much, JP, for sharing that. Thank you all for being open to this. There is so much we can take apart. Man, I wish we were all together. There's so much we could just take apart, even just from what JP said. I think it's fabulous that you're having these conversations with your parents. And just the interesting dynamic that they're both from the same country. They have two totally different, thoughts about privilege and how they've grown up. So yes, like having these conversations about privilege and understanding what it means. I know someone mentioned, some people getting offended when you hear the term white privilege, and other people, having this sort of everybody just works hard, everybody has the same 24 hours of the day, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, just think with me for a while. I think in the last few years, we've probably heard it, but I'm gonna tell you, 10 years ago, you weren't hearing people talk about privilege. You just weren't. And so that's why I feel like it's really important for us to think about our own awareness with this cultural humility piece, and to not do it in the silo, like not just do it in the silo of I'm at the Coalition Academy and I'm attending the cultural humility and I'll check that and I'll be able to get that credit, but really taking it out of this workshop and into the context of the world that we live in with all of the things that are going on, and understanding that. And so, just a couple of things I want you to think about is, do you think you have privilege? Do you think you have privilege? And how can you use your privilege in your work with communities? So do you think you have it? And then how can you use your privilege in your work with communities? So I don't want you to always think that it's like, oh, they're going to talk about privilege. Oh, now they're going to say da-da-da. It's like, recognizing it, right? Being aware of it. You remember that other slide that talk about the power imbalances and neutralizing that. So if you're coming to work with the community, sort of automatically saying, you know what, I know I just came from such and such, or that I know I have and share some privileges that may not be here, but I am here for us to work together. It goes a long way with people, right? So it's not, every little thing that we do helps us to get where we want to go. And if we don't start having the conversations about it, then it just continues to be the dirty P word that we're not going to talk about. And then that's when we have these systems of inequity and racism that we have to get past. So I just thank you that's what I wanted to do this afternoon, right? So it talks about lifelong learning, right? And commitment to lifelong learning, but also this commitment to critical reflection, right? So you may have experiences, but if we don't take the time to think about them and process them and talk about them like we're doing now, then how do we grow from them? So thank you again to all of your comments. For those of you that unmute and actually let us hear your voice, and for the comments in the chat. So one of the last pieces that we talk about is the institutional accountability, right? And so I remember someone said, I think in the chat, someone said early on, like, oh, I love that institutional accountability part when it came to the video, right? And so now we're talking about encouraging a philosophy and a culture of empathy, right? And trying to open ourselves up to understand what it might feel like to be in someone else's place. And I'm gonna go back to the comment that Nanya made, because I knew you guys would bring great experiences. So she said, as she's trying to have these conversations with her husband, she's like, she just asked him the question, so what do you do if you get pulled over? And he's like, I get kind of cocky. And she said, well, people of color don't, because they fear for their lives. Her having that conversation with her husband, and then him being willing to even think about it, is encouraging a philosophy of empathy. It was a perfect example of saying, like, yeah, you might do that, but okay, let's just take a moment and see what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. And you may never fully understand what that's like, but if we never take the moment to have the critical self-reflection about it, we'll just continue to do things as we always do. And it's not that those things are wrong, but does that really open up for a more culturally inclusive nation, right? So if I continue, remember I said, we've got tons and tons of leadership opportunities all throughout the day. We make all these decisions all throughout the day, Yep. Oh, probably wasn't the best decision I made when I talked to Christy about that. Yep. And I don't think about it. But when I take the time to reflect on it, that's helping me to learn, right? It's helping me to grow, and it's helping me to be accountable. And so that's what we think about, when we want this institutional accountability. I feel like sometimes, and I know it's hard, sometimes we're like, well, I know I'm not racist, but I can't say about my organization because they do a lot of, we are not completely responsible for our organizations, right? We're not. But if we begin to encourage, right, this uncomfortable conversations, and we begin to encourage a philosophy of empathy, I'm telling you, people, you can feel that. You can feel that when you go into agencies, even if there's bureaucratic systems, you'll feel the philosophy and the culture of empathy. Because then this is how we begin to eradicate things like racism, because they're institutionalized, right? So a lot of these views are institutionalized. There are all of these institutionalized systems of inequity. And so when we begin to encourage that philosophy of, let me not just ignore what that person is saying because that's not been my experience, but let me actually try to hold on a minute, let me stop, play pause, and think about what it might feel like for that person. So encouraging those open conversations. And so again, I want to thank you for that. And so I've got another critical reflection piece for you. So what I'd like to ask now is for you to think about this. So how can you, in your own agency, work to build principles of cultural humility as a way to help inform and transform the policies and the practices and rules that shape our organizational culture? So I would like for you to share, maybe write it down for yourself, but how can I within my own agency, begin to build that? I work in an agency, we used to be at Odatus, and I think it was 100 of us. We moved, we merged with the Ohio Department of Mental Health. There's 3,000 of us. That's a culture shift. So I know that all of us are limited in our abilities, right? When we come up against organizational culture and policies and practices, but cultural humility demands that we have accountability, right? It demands that we look inside, that we begin to say, I am going to make a commitment to lifelong learning. I'm also going to reflect on my experiences. I'm going to be accountable, and I'm going to try to encourage this whole philosophy of empathy. I mean, we talk about social and emotional learning and prevention and how important it is for our young people, but sometimes I'm like, do y'all realize it's important for us? So ask ourselves, so how do you think that you can work to build these principles of cultural humility in your own agency? And you can raise your hand, and James will be so kind as to let you unmute and you can share.
Yeah, we're getting a couple comments in the text box that we should make the difficult topics speakable.
Ooh, I love that. Yes.
That one of the critical first steps is to create awareness about cultural humility. People don't know what they don't know. Then we will throw it over to Latif, who has his hand up, so we will unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. Well, one of the things that's always amazing to me is how white folk don't understand the concept of white privilege. I don't see how they don't get that, because to say that there's no white privilege means that there is no racism.
So
that's my point.
I think part of it is it's a learning experience, right? I think I'm gonna use you, Nanya. I think the perfect example was when she talked about her husband. This is the one piece about privilege. A lot of times people don't realize they have it. It becomes like culture. Remember earlier we talked about culture is like the air you breathe. It's like, I live in it. I experience it. This is what I do. And I've never, ever seen it as me having something that somebody else doesn't, because some of the things that people said that they hear, everybody's got the same 24 hours, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? All of those pieces, that's just a part of life. Like, not everybody's gonna understand that they have privilege. Even after we have some heart-to-heart conversations, some people still don't wanna hear it, because I think sometimes people feel like, with privilege, what am I gonna lose? What do I have to lose? And so it's some fear. And so this is part of the uncomfortable conversations we have to be willing to have. We have to be willing to have them in a way that's respectful, and to be okay with like, okay, so this is what I believe, and then this is what you believe. And, apparently we're not going to solve world peace tonight, but let's continue to have the conversations. Let's continue to talk about them, because that's how we all learn. So there's a lot of white folks that don't understand white privilege. And there's a lot of white folks that completely understand it and are huge allies, So, I mean, you can only do what you can do, but what I want to ask here is, what can you do? What can I personally do? Is there someone that doesn't understand their privilege that I might be willing to have a conversation with about it? Anybody else?
Yeah, we have quite a few hands up at this point.
Okay.
I will also say that maybe something to think about. We've gotten a comment in the chat box.
Okay.
Is that white people that recognize privilege, what and using that privilege, someone commented that they feel like they should apologize. I guess I would just throw that out there to think about in the context of your conversation.
I think somebody says, what I struggle with is how I feel about privilege. I feel like I should apologize. So I feel like sometimes I don't even know if the word is apologize or if that's what it is, but it's that power imbalance I talked about, right? How do you neutralize it? You neutralize it by acknowledging. If you're like, I'm white, I have white privilege in this space. Before I have this conversation about whatever it is, or before we go into this, you say, I've seen it done beautifully. I've seen people say before, you know what, I would like to make a comment about this, or I'd like to add something. But first of all, I want to recognize that I realize and accept the privilege that I have, as a white woman, or as a, and so just saying it feels kind of coming out the first time. But once we begin to say it, I think, you get used to it. And Evie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think I remember, like, I don't know, because Evie's been around like us when she was, in school and stuff. Like a year or two ago, I remember being in some conversation and having her say something like that. Like, I recognize my privilege. And I was like, what? Like, wow. Not that I was surprised at that, but I was like, I don't always hear it, right? And so how quickly it's kind of like, whew, okay. When you think you're about to have this conversation and everybody's like this, it's like, and somebody says, you know what, I recognize the privilege that I have right here. It kind of neutralizes it. So again, those conversations always aren't going to be comfortable, but it's like, the more you say it, the more you do it. The more you say it, the more comfortable you will get. It's our responsibility. Like, everything that we do is not about people's comfort level, right? It's about trying to get to a place where we're serving people better, we're respecting people with differences better. When we come to a place in understanding ourselves, then we can help others. And we can't move forward until we understand who we are and all the biases and the culture stuff. Like, for me, so that all those slides in the beginning when I was showing you, it's like, where did I get that? Where did I get that? Like, I don't want work is work and this is where did I get that? And taking some time to think about it. Some of it, I'll be honest with you, probably was from, as a Black child, I grew up feeling like you have to be better, stronger, faster. You have to do things twice as good, So I don't have time to be friends with people I work with because I'm trying to be better, stronger, faster. And that's, I'm admitting that's a vulnerability. That's a cultural thing. That's a bias that I was raised with. And so being able to take some time and examine that and figure out, but if I got to connect with people, I got to get beyond that. So there's some stuff I got to work on. Someone says, I think I actually see some, at the end of the workshop, I figure out how to open up the chat box. But I see lots of comments in here. Somebody says, I think it comes from a misunderstanding of the term privilege, right? So I think that's part of it. And I know I want to be mindful of time, but I also want to give people some time to ask questions if they have it. So I want to just go to my last slide here. And my last slide, I think, is really important. It's like, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are, right? So the way I see the world is through how I shared with you. I see it through my grandma's glasses. I see it through, you know, family. I see it through holidays. I see it through, you know, my family being preachers and teachers and I see the world like that. There's nothing wrong with seeing the world like that, right? But I've got to be big enough to reflect on it, recognize that that's my stuff, right? That's what makes me Dawn. But recognizing how that might interfere when I work with other communities and being able to check myself, right? Being able to check myself and say, wait a minute, that probably wasn't the nicest thing I could say. You know, yeah, I had just got finished seeing, you know, the Breonna Taylor thing, and I was feeling some kind of way when somebody asked me a question, you know, about my hair or whatever. And so being able to check myself and then reflecting on it and saying, you know, I still have a responsibility though, right? I still have a responsibility to be able to be open and try to help folks learn. So I think having empathy with people and understanding the world that we live in and understanding that everybody comes to this knowledge on their own terms. But as professionals in prevention, this is what we're called to do. I believe that we can't do the work of Spiffville until we've done the cultural humility work. I strongly believe we can't do that assessment capacity. We can't do all that other stuff for our communities until we've done the work that we need to do inside. So again, focusing on that lifelong learning and critical self-reflection, recognizing and challenging our power imbalances, and understanding our institutional accountability, and that there are things that we can do. And so I would say thank you very, very much. I've got some resources here for you. And then I know we have questions. And then I think James wants to do some housekeeping. Questions?
Yeah, a question did come in. How do you not become drained or frustrated in this current reality while being empathetic?
Oh my goodness. So, oh man, I think it's really hard. All right. So I love Dr. Blankenship's presentation earlier when she kind of like really pointed out, you know, those things that stress us and then the things, how we begin to use tools, right? So we hear the term self-care a lot, and I'm going to say something about that, but I think we have to know when to turn off the media. We have to, you know, we live in a world, it's great because we can get information very, very fast, but we live in a world because we can get information so fast, it will drain our souls and spirit. And so you've got to realize that's why you got to take that time for critical self-reflection. As I mentioned, all the leadership moments of the day, I'm not talking about all the leadership moments of your day having to do with culture or having to do with race. I'm talking about all the leadership moments of the day. If you heard this, and you get all drained, you've got to know yourself enough to know, how do I get rid of that? Because until I get rid of the garbage and the junk, I have nothing else to give. And then I began to put myself in a situation where I'm physically ill and my immune system is not good. So you've got to figure out what are the things that you can do for self-care. This is something, I heard it this week and I'm just going to share it with you. And it was from Equity for the Health of It. I follow them on Instagram. It says, shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. And so just being aware again of the privilege of, you know, you guys, I have the privilege of being able to do self-care to me, because guess what? I don't have children, so I don't have to worry about in school. I don't have to worry about preparing meals. So when I talk about us having privilege on some level, all of us have some privilege on some level, but we have to know ourselves enough to know when we've got to clean out the stuff. And I think critical self-reflection helps, writing some things down and reflecting on some of our experiences, good, bad, and different. You know, maybe you had a really good experience, like reflecting on that and getting that joy back. Other questions?
Actually, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's another session starting and they need this virtual space to meet. So we do need to wrap up.
Yes.
Dr. Thomas, I think there's one more slide. If you could go to that, it's got some information
Yes. There we
from
go.
Prevention First. Please be sure to complete the training evaluation survey in the email you will receive. Reminder for social workers, counselors, and CHIS credits, you must provide a license number or information from your credentials, and you will receive your certificate for continuing education within the next 30 days by email. So, Dr. Thomas, this was, and I know you can see the questions box, the large amount of praise coming in. This was a fantastic way to spend my afternoon. I think everyone, all 100+ people in here would agree with me. So
Thank you all.
thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thank you to Prevention First for this awesome engagement opportunity. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon.